everybody, welcome back to That Fiction Life. I can't quite believe that I'm making this video. This whole first section is going to be spoiler free. This is a huge ass book and not everyone may have had the chance to finish it yet. I can't even put into words the feeling that I had while reading this. It took me back to a time in my life that was so much simpler than now. You know, for a lot of people, it's the same kind of situation. When we all first Twilight, a lot of us were teenagers. And as Stephanie even wrote in the dedication, she realizes that we all have grown up and most of us are adults now. A lot of people didn't think this book was needed, myself included. And I take all of that back. I didn't think that this book would offer anything new. You know, it's Twilight rewritten from Edward's perspective. Let me enlighten you all. After I read this, I now understand why this book is 800 pages. So upon first hearing that this book was going to be very long, I wanted certain things from it. I wanted flashbacks. I didn't want just the scenes that we saw with Bella from another angle, because who cares? We've been through that plot. I genuinely reread Twilight last week. I vlogged the whole experience. I will link that video below if you would like to relive the feels with me. And let me tell you, this book delivered on so many of my wishes. Primarily the Cullen content. The Cullens are my favourite literary family. I actually prefer them all to Bella and Edward. I personally would have loved an entire series just about them, or a novella collection of when they first became vampires or something similar. So I'm going to delve into all of those scenes in depth in the spoilers section. So I'm going to put a disclaimer and say that this is going to be a very subjective review because I have a very obsessive history with this series. It's the series that introduced me to obsessive reading and being a fandom. So this video is primarily here for us to go through the feelings together, analyze the character interactions. But I will say one thing about the writing style, and that is that I feel as though this is very different to the original Twilight series. The sentences seemed much smoother. I talked about this in my Twilight reading vlog, in that the writing was very choppy and it was a little bit all over the place. And here it feels like a succinct book with a much more streamlined plot. Especially Bella and Edward's relationship didn't seem that fast in Midnight Sun, because of course there are more pages and thereby we see more of a gradual falling in love story. I have a funny story already about this reading experience. So because I listened to the majority of the beginning on audio, there's this piano piece that introduces you to the story, and I listened to my audiobooks on 1.7 times fast. Let me tell you what I listened to. I was like, what fresh hell is this? Jake Abel narrated it, and he played one of the main characters in the Host movie, which was also written by Stephanie Meyer, so he has a very big connection to the Twilight saga. Also, Helen Lutz is reading it, talking about how amazing the extra Emmett scenes are, and right, so that's all we're going to say with no spoilers. So if you haven't read this book yet, please exit this video. I was very surprised that the book begins by diving straight into the first high school scene. There's a new student milling about. When Edward starts telling us how he perceives all of the Cullen thoughts, reading Emmett's mind never felt intrusive because he only thinks things that he would be comfortable with sharing with people, how Jasper's thoughts are very pained, and how Rosalie just mainly thinks about herself, which we will talk about Rosalie a little bit later on because I don't like how she was treated in this book. One of the best scenes in this whole book was when Edward was actually struggling while Bella was in the classroom. In the Twilight film, in the Twilight book, it makes everyone laugh because he genuinely is just kind of, I can't deal with the smell. If it was actually more dangerous than everyone perceived, and this whole section was so dark and I was living for it. At the end of the day, this is a vampire book. We're expecting some gothic and mythical aspects to pop up once in a while. Edward was already immediately analysing killing the entire classroom to hide any evidence of him losing control with Bella, and I did not see that coming. We see the Cullens as these perfect specimens because that's how Bella described them. They would never hurt her, they have such great self-control. Here Edward has a whole entire plan how he's going to lead her into the woods and how easy it would be for him to just snap her neck right there. He moves on from it pretty quickly though, and he realizes that he needs to actually be in control because this could ruin all of their lives. And he begins to feel this little spark that he may not actually want to kill her, and he's having a conversation with Emmett, and Emmett says, no one would blame you, it's okay, maybe she'll be fine, or maybe you just kill her. That made me laugh a lot. Emmett's one-liners in this book could win awards. He feels very comfortable in every scene that he's in, and he adds this very great comedic relief, and I've always loved that about him, but we rarely heard any conversations with him because of course again Bella didn't spend that much time with him. Another scene that I loved was when Tyler hits Bella with his van. Bella was pretty oblivious to the whole thing, she just saw Edward from far away. Suddenly he's next to her. Reading this scene from Edward's point of view was a whole experience because of course Alice has a vision which Edward can see because he can read her mind. They actually see Bella die in that situation before Edward decides to save her. It was almost like a performance. He was careful to fix the car so they wouldn't be able to find the dent that he made with his hand. Emmett subtly telling him that he's going to fix anything that Edward may have missed. The little details that we were able to see. I laughed so hard at Edward's spiraling thoughts though when Bella is falling. From her point of view, he seemed so calm and collected, but now seeing what he was actually like, it's like chaos in his mind. I mean, that was this whole book. So Edward begins to stalk her a little bit, which I still don't like. My least favourite part of this book was definitely him feeling so possessed to go and watch her sleep every night. Is that really necessary? I would feel so violated if I eventually found out that was happening. But the one silver lining of this was that he was noticing all the little things that none of the other guys in the class even thought about. He saw the little snippets of good that she was doing. I was so disappointed by the Alaska scene. I really wanted to actually see Edward hang out with the Denalis because he was there for a week, but it turns out he just ran around in the woods the whole time and he had a very awkward scene with Tanya and that was it. Emmett going hunting with Edward. I apologise in advance if this video is just going to be me talking about Emmett because him and Rosalie were the highlight of this book and they were definitely the underdogs in this whole story because I don't know why, but I always felt like Edward and Alice were the closest siblings. And yes, they do have a connection, but Emmett and Edward's relationship definitely was not something I was expecting. Their hunting trip kind of solidified that. The way Emmett is trying to give him advice but is also saying you have to be realistic because this is a human girl, can you even touch her? You claim to love her but can you actually be together because she's going to grow old and you are not. It ran away from that stereotype that Emmett is just this big sporty guy who's very goofy all the time, but in this book we were able to see that he is quite logical and I enjoyed seeing the smart side of him because that's often forgotten I think in the series. Right, we need to talk about the Port Angeles scene. Now hearing, and I'm not excusing all of the stalking, but just this particular instant, we didn't know that Peter and Charlotte were visiting. They don't follow the lifestyle of the Cullens, and now it makes a little bit more sense as to why Edward, especially that night, felt the need to follow her. Right, so Edward begins to describe his relationship with Bella as the Hades and Persephone story, which I must admit I'd never heard the Twilight comparison before this cover came out, and suddenly everyone was discussing how their story is very reminiscent of the myth. And it makes sense when he described it, but I just never saw it that way when we read the original saga. And now I'm really sad that the series didn't utilize that more, because imagine if this series was more of a mythological retelling as opposed to just a little connection to their relationship, because that could have given it some very cool historical connection. One of my favorite scenes, again, Emmett, my king. Edward and Emmett are having a conversation. I'll bet Mrs. Goff thinks you're on drugs. You've been so erratic lately. Where were you today? I was doing good deeds, caring for the sick, that kind of thing. Oh, the girl again? This is getting weird. Tell me about it. She does have quite a flavour, doesn't she? Emmett! Lord. That was quite funny. Also, we have a whole entire scene of Edward writing Bella's lullaby, and can I just say, having the context to this scene was so many feels. Just, oh God, no, come back. Now, chapter 11, called Interrogations. This is the extra content I needed from this book. I never thought about it before, but these actual criminals that were planning to attack Bella in Port Angeles just were able to go about their day. However, the fact that Edward felt inclined to make the streets safer, and him and Carlisle had this whole plan to have them arrested so that they would be off the streets. This was on the news. I can't believe how much of a fake friend Jessica was to Bella. She did make those snide comments throughout Twilight, but here we're actually hearing her thoughts and how much resentment she holds for Bella, and honestly, she was a crap friend. I'm so glad that Angela is a pure soul, because I always adored her character. Just as Edward said, I'm glad she had one true friend when she joined the school. I'm dying at the scene where Edward is listening to Jessica's thoughts and she says, "Nuh-uh, I don't believe this. How the hell did Bella pull this off?" I mean, they're somewhat of an item officially now. It's so funny seeing her completely freak out. The most hilarious scene, I think we all agree, is when Edward tried to play matchmaker so that Ben would ask out Angela. I love how much happened behind the scenes. So I'll keep repeating this, but in Twilight, you just had Bella going on her dates with Edward because she didn't really do anything else in the whole book. Here you have Edward hatching up plans with Emmett, he's hanging out with Jasper, he's going hunting with Alice. You know, you have those little snippets where you are able to learn about his character as opposed to just who he is in Bella's presence. So, did you ask Angela Weber out yet? No, why not? Are we lacking in courage? No, I heard she was interested in someone else. And then they act as though they didn't know that Ben was right behind them listening to their conversation, and voila, the plan worked. Ben goes to ask out Angela, and here we had Edward Cullen pretending to be interested in her. So we're nearly halfway through the book and Bella already knows about vampires. Their relationship is moving swiftly on. So he's picking her up from class one day and he's coming across as so shy in her presence. Every time she looks at him, he almost has this torturous look about him. He can't believe that she actually likes him. And it's just so different to the very confident, cool Edward we saw in Twilight. Here he is completely a mess. I found it very interesting that Alice was already so invested in their relationship, and the scene where he tells Bella that he's going hunting with Alice as opposed to going to look through the futures with her was such an integral scene. Oh, a highlight of this book is any cafeteria scene where Bella and Edward are hanging out and then the Cullens are providing an almost commentary in his mind, talking about the whole situation with him. When Bella says, "Oh, they don't like me," and he says, "That's not it," and then Rosalie says, "Ha!" And then when Bella looks towards Rosalie, in her head she says, "Goggle at me, will you, you bat-faced little nuisance." So I alluded a little bit at the start that I didn't like how Rosalie's character was treated for the majority of this book. And in these scenes particularly, everyone is almost dismissive of her feelings as to why she doesn't like Bella. She's portrayed as this very shallow and vain type of character, and it makes me mad because that's not all that this is. If you look at her life, everything that she's been through, how not being able to be human is almost torturous to her. And of course her distrust of Bella is completely justified, you know, is this stranger infiltrating your family? And I think Edward shouldn't have been so quick to dismiss her feelings in this situation. They do have a huge bonding scene later on in the book, but I didn't like the little snippets where he continuously says that all Rosalie cares about is her looks and all of that. You know, there is so much to her character, and I need a whole entire book about Rosalie because I think it would be funny, first of all, because she's so snarky and sarcastic, but we would also see such a great development from her. Okay, so Alice and Edward are going through the various futures, and one of the futures they look at is if Edward decided to leave her. And in the vision, Bella is completely having a little bit of a breakdown, and Edward says, "What's wrong? Why is she like that?" Alice answers, "Because you left. She's not doing well." Is that foreshadowing for New Moon? We all saw Bella's spiral when he ultimately did decide to leave in the sequel, and it honestly surprised me just how much he thought about leaving her this early on. I screamed when he's considering what to do if he did leave, and he says, "It was nothing that would ever bring her the wrong kind of attention. Though I'd not been the one to tell her the truth about myself, she knew things she was forbidden to know. It was nothing that would ever bring her the wrong kind of attention, unless I did something stupid, like go to Italy." Sorry, I need a minute. You know, I will forever hate the plot of New Moon. Why would you not check with someone to see whether Bella was actually dead? Why would you not call the Cullens, any of them? You could call Charlie, you could, I don't know, you could even come back for a second. That plot was purely there to include the Volturi in the plot. But there were so many other ways to do that because Carlisle himself has such a huge connection to them. Then we have a big major flashback to when Edward first became a vampire. I was a tiny bit disappointed because I think I would have liked to actually experience the scene as opposed to him remembering these things, but I'm still so happy that we have some 1900s Edward content. He's somewhat of a new vampire, and he decides to leave Carlisle and Esme and go off on his own for a little bit. And we knew about this to a tiny extent in Twilight because he is telling Bella the story, but the detail that we had in this, the fact that he went to hunt down criminals and that's how he was sort of quenching his thirst, so to speak, speaks a lot about his character. He did want to experience life as a real vampire, but he didn't want to go and hunt random victims. He then eventually returns to Carlisle and Esme with red eyes, and it was this whole thing. Now, the scene that completely broke me is when Edward is telling Bella how Rosalie met Emmett. We knew the gist of the story. She found him in the woods because he was attacked by a bear, but the detail of Edward's thoughts, I mean, the way he described how she almost flew into the house, how her thoughts were completely irrational, that she was pretty much a mess. My expectations were all turned upside down as she cried out in panic, calling for Carlisle's help. And then beneath the shrill sound of her distress, I caught the sound of one very feeble heartbeat. Of course, being Emmett. Rosalie, in such a fragile state. It's not something that we've become accustomed to. The way she begged Carlisle to turn him and save his life. I mean, Carlisle finally understands what she's asking and he decides to turn Emmett, but of course Rosalie can't really be in the room anymore. She has exhausted so much control already, and Edward takes her and they run out of the house for a few days. We couldn't return for a while, though Rosalie was anxious in the extreme to know what was happening. Those hours changed us both. When Carlisle finally came to call us home, we returned as brother and sister. And I'm low-key mad, actually no, scratch that, I'm very mad, high-key, not even trying to hide this. I want to know what happened in those hours. That feels like a pivotal moment. What did they talk about? What actually occurred? I'm only beginning to guess how difficult that journey was for her. I love Rosalie to death. I mean, all of the Cullens hold a special place in my heart, but I think her the most. This book is an Emmett and Rosalie heavy book. I was very surprised about that because I thought we would have a lot more Alice and Jasper content because, as I said at the start, I thought that was who Edward was closest to. Another highlight scene is when Billy comes to Bella's house to warn Charlie that his daughter's dating a vampire. Jacob's thoughts in this scene, him again, so she must be dating him. Oh, you poor child. Yes, I really liked Bella in this scene because she was very headstrong. She was not taking anything from anyone. Billy was, you know, being very suggestive. You know, the Cullens have a bad reputation, and Bella just claps back, oh, but the reputation's not very deserved, is it? Because they don't step foot on the reservation. I especially loved that we were able to see the Carlisle and Billy conversation that of course happened when the Cullens decided to move back to Forks, and they needed to inform one of the elders. It was a really cool connection to the history and the original treaty that was made. Okay, so we're reaching the baseball game, and I can't believe how Rosalie was nearly not in attendance. Rosalie is still not fond of Bella. She doesn't agree that she's risking her human life for Edward. And at this point, I was agreeing with Edward a little bit, as much as I understand Rosalie's struggles with the Bella situation. I think she was unnecessarily cruel to her, and I think it was just a real imbalance to how she was treating Edward. Because, you know, all Bella did was just fall in love with someone, and I don't think she understood just how dire the situation that she was in was. So we've made it to the game. Up until this point, this book was fun. It was exciting getting all this information about the Cullens and the darker aspects of this vampire life, but it was pretty much the exact same as Twilight. And, you know, you had the very weird descriptions of her at the start. From this point onwards, this book blew my expectations so far out of proportion, because the tiny details, the very strategic way that everything played out, it proved that Stephanie Meyer is a very good storyteller. The scene that completely shook me was what Jasper was doing in the background of this whole scene. The new strangers have taken no interest in Jasper, and even Edward is finding this very suspicious, because Jasper as a vampire is supposed to be very noticeable. He's supposed to look very intimidating and menacing, but he looked nondescript and docile, Jasper. And then he clicked the pieces together and he realized that he was covering Alice, Esme and Bella in the same haze. So to James, Victoria and Laurent, they didn't look like people that they should focus on. They didn't draw the eye. And I don't know why that affected me so much. I love Jasper, but I didn't expect this kind of caring nature from him towards Bella. He was shielding the most vulnerable people in the coven. The emotions. Following on from a little bit when they get in the car trying to escape, Emmett sits in the back with Bella, recognizing that he would need to be her bodyguard as long as I needed to drive. He was willing, even eager. Alice sat by me, and without asking, she was sprinting through all the futures we could face now. Like, the detail of this whole ending, it was a masterpiece. How all of the Cullens banded together, they were having covert conversations, and this was just something we were not able to experience in Twilight. When Bella, Jasper and Alice go to Phoenix, and Emmett, Carlisle and Edward stay behind to try and hunt down James, we actually go through the whole plot, them running across the states to try and hunt him down, to finding the empty airport where James escaped, and the way they all work together. These are my favourite sections, because again, in Twilight, you were not able to see their family bonds. Bella, she's almost an onlooker on the whole situation. She doesn't understand the dynamics between the group. Carlisle and Emmett were doing everything possible for Edward. Their thoughts throughout this whole sequence were just so captivating. So in the meantime, Bella escapes Jasper by pretending to go to the restroom. Now they are hunting James because he has her. They are all panicking, switching lanes, and Alice is looking through all the futures and she says, you're going to need every one of us, because she knows that if Edward goes by himself because he's the fastest, Bella will not make it. My heart was racing. The way, oh, Jasper again, the way he kept Edward from losing his mind by controlling his emotions. His grip on my emotions was so strong in that second that it felt like a fist clenched tight around my throat. Edward described this feeling was as if he was being dosed with Novocaine. I was jittery with stress this whole section. The way that he's counting down how fast they are going. You know, they're going 140, 180. They're being chased by the police. I needed Jasper when I was reading, let alone Edward completely losing his mind. When they eventually find Bella, it was so different seeing this from the vampire's perspective, because there is so much human blood everywhere and they are all fighting their natural instincts because they all love Bella. Like, even Alice was not physically prepared for this. She hesitated, teeth clenched, trying to swallow back the venom. Emmett and Jasper too were struggling. They've pulled the shattered pieces of the tracker, but Emmett was watching Jasper closely from a break. I also adored the entire section when Alice is trying to hatch up the plan as how they're going to trick the authorities and everyone who may be suspicious as to why exactly Bella ended up in the hospital. She actually throws herself through the window to stage the scene. I mean, it was almost like a performance. The need to get Bella's car to Phoenix, so she sends Emmett to retrieve it from Rosalie. Oh, I just remembered another scene that completely shook me to the core, and it's when they make it to the ballet studio and Edward is very determined to crash through the door, and Alice says if he hears us, she dies, and Alice actually had to see all these circumstances play out in order to know what not to do. Now, the scene that broke me was when Edward actually watched the tape that James made. That was not okay. I was not prepared for that. The way Alice gave in and gave it to him. She discovered her own history. That was a whole highlight from this book and Twilight. I loved that we learned about Alice's past. It was emotional. I was not expecting this book to be so dark. And it's my favourite part about it, because I think sometimes the vampire aspect of this series is very overlooked and people laugh at how they all sparkle, which I do as well. It's the stupidest thing. Why couldn't they just have fangs? Aside from that, they are all very dangerous. In many ways, this is why this book was better than Twilight, because we were in the mindset of the vampires. I can honestly say I loved this book. The majority of the beginning was kind of a fun, nostalgic way of seeing the series in another way. Part 2 of it was a whole different experience. The highlights were definitely Rosalie and Emmett. I've talked about that for most of this video. I need more books about the Cullens. Stephanie, please. Reliving my teenage years, going through this plot, learning so much about this world and my favourite characters is something that I'm never going to forget, and I'm so happy that this book was published. We've been waiting for 10 or so years now, and I was beginning to lose hope we were ever going to have any more Twilight content from Stephanie. Let me know your thoughts. What did you think of this book? It was such a fun, nostalgic journey for me. Make sure to leave your comments below, because I would love to keep discussing the book with you. If you're not subscribed to my channel yet, make sure to click the button below and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!